GG, Gallaro Gaming. Builds, guides, walkthroughs, and gameplay.
Welcome gamers to Gallaro Gaming. Today, I'm going to give you my gaming resume. Basically, all the games and some of the playstyles that I've developed over the last 20 years in MMORPGs. That way, you know what to expect from me in the future, and some of the playstyles and games that I'll be looking at in the future as well. Okay, so my very first MMO was called Tibia Online. This was way back in the late 90s. It introduced me to a very important aspect of what these are, and that is the MMO aspect of it. Meeting and playing with other players like yourself, getting to know other people who had the same interests, and then just getting your grind on and enjoying the game itself. There were a couple other games that I played after Tibia Online, such as RuneScape and a few others. But the next big one for me was called Fiesta Online. This was the game that introduced me to tanking and eventually off-meta builds. So I started the game out as a knight and went through the game being a tank, eventually got to the end game, and I started a guild there, and eventually when I got to the end game I started doing raids. Now this was a game where the raids themselves weren't like they are nowadays where it's all instants. There was one raid boss for the entire server, and only the party with the top DPS, the 5 best players, were getting the raid drop. So usually you'd have a large group go in to support those 5 top DPS. Your tank would hold the aggro with the healers, you'd have a healing party that just healed everybody else, and you'd have just one party of mass DPS doing that. You had to organize everything and get everything set up just right to where everything would run fluidly. And eventually, after I was doing all of that with my knight, I started to learn and do speed runs with an off-meta tank build using an assassin that they introduced later on in game, where I would just dodge all the attacks with the stats that were provided in game and set it up to where I could hold aggro and full parties with crit. That way I could still do as much damage as anybody else in there, hold all the aggro, not take any damage because I was dodging instead of blocking or mitigating damage. And it allowed for a lot faster runs, and it really introduced me to an off-meta setup for doing speed runs and high-tier content at the end of the game as well. And of course, this game did end up adding PvP later on into its life cycle, and unlike nowadays, the PvP wasn't as much toxic as it is. It was a lot more friendly. You'd go into there, you pick a 1v1 with a friend or somebody else that was in there, and you guys would just play, enjoy, and some of us would go and make YouTube videos and post them online. But at the end of the day, you were usually still friendly, and there wasn't a whole lot of drama caused because of PvP at the time. Before they introduced these new PvP zones in each of the hubs, in order to do PvP in the game at all, you had to start a guild war with another guild. And usually this was done just for fun or just for like a guild rivalry issue going on in game over certain grind spots or something like that. But it was never too bad. There wasn't a whole lot of issues between the player base itself. It was still generally a pretty friendly game. After about 5 years of playing Fiesta, the company was bought out by another company and the game transitioned over to them. And they took an already highly monetized game and made it even worse. Where a game that was truly pay to win, where you had to buy cash shop items in order to play in the end game, they went and added in a gambling system that allowed you to gamble for in-game raid quality loot, so that you could have the best weapons and gear in game without ever having to participate in any of the actual raids. Now, after Fiesta, my next game was a huge game changer for me. It was a completely different playstyle. I got into a game that was a lot more player skill based rather than stat based. Got into playing Vindictus. It's a lot more commonly known than Fiesta was, but the gameplay for it itself was a lot more movement oriented. You had to dodge, you had to move, you had to attack, lights, heavies, build up chain combos. Everything was completely different, and I almost instantly fell in love with the gameplay. The graphics were amazing, the combat system was great, everything just felt good. But this type of gearing system that they had also allowed for a lot more deviation than you have this gear set for this class and it comes with these type of stats. This one used a weight system on the gear that allowed you to actually customize the way that your character was built, mix in lights, medium, heavyweight gear, and all different types of things to that extent. The only thing that was set was which weapon you used. So this is where I really got heavy into doing theory crafting and off-meta builds, and I took a character that was supposed to be a glass cannon, and I put it in heavy gear because the character itself used both magic and strength for its primary stat basis to determine what the damage that the combos would do. Its last hit, which was its notably larger damage hit, was based off intelligence, but all the hits leading up to it were based off of strength. The common way to play this was you just whiff everything to the beginning and you make sure that your last attack lands, and then you get out of dodge and start the combination over again, whiffing everything else to where the lead up hits the boss. Well, I thought, what if I could just take all the hits that the boss might dish out and land every hit? Would it compensate for the difference in damage and still allow me to play up close and personal with it and be in the face of the boss? So I went and did a little bit of testing, found out the numbers and everything for it. Lo and behold, if you landed every hit in the combination, including your last hit and the special to it, it would actually do more damage, and because of the way that the class worked, you were probably one of the most survivable classes in the game. And the reason for that is that the class itself had a magic shield that was based off your intelligence. The more intelligence you had, faster the magic shield regenerated, and you could not die in one hit as long as you had the magic shield. It would just pop your shield. So you'd be in combat, your magic shield would regain, you'd take a hit, it'd disappear, it'd come back, so on and so forth. Now, on the forums and the threads where I posted the build as I was doing it and showed videos and did testing with it, a lot of people kind of came up in arms over it because it went against the thought process of the way that the class had always been played as a glass cannon. And because of all the attention and drama that it stirred up on the forums, a lot more people actually went and tested out the build and started using it, and it became a very common thing to see a build that I created being used in content. And for me, that was a huge event and turning point because it actually showed that I could make something that might allow other people to enjoy their game more than the way they were already, or just a change in pace for somebody. You know, to me, being able to help somebody else that I played with, or even that I didn't know, enjoy the game in a new manner was a huge thing to me because it showed that I was able to help somebody and that they actually took something from it. To me, this was the point in time where I actually started to make things to help other people out and do stuff to really push and change the environment of the games that I played in. It made a huge change to me, and it changed the way that I thought about what I was doing in the games and made me a lot more vocal and outspoken in regards to the builds that I was using and that I was making for people. And this carried over later on into other games that I played as well that actually allowed for theory crafting down the line. After about 3 years of playing Vindictus and 2 physical moves, I was now too far away from the server, which was a peer-to-peer based connection game, that I was no longer able to host and play with other people on the game anymore, that it just became too unbearable for me to do. So I started looking for a new game, and I ended up playing Terra Online, had pre-ordered the game itself and started playing that for a good long while. That was my next big game, and I touched on this game again later on when it came to Xbox as well. Now, Terra Online was a huge thing in the MMO community when it was initially being released. It was very hyped up and supposed to be a beautiful world with amazing gameplay and great combat systems and something that hadn't been seen before. But for somebody like me who loved the endgame of an MMO and got to the endgame as quick as possible so I could really enjoy the hardcore content that usually is at an endgame, it felt a little lacking on initial release. There wasn't a whole lot there. There was a few dungeons to do. You would do one to gear up to go to the next one, and then do that one to gear up to go to the next one. And it was a very linear progression without a whole lot of variation. I wasn't really all that much into and didn't enjoy as much as I was hoping I would. So I ended up going back to Vindictus for a short while. Now, during that time frame is when I made my last and final move up to Alaska, which is where I currently reside now. And this, for me, is when I actually stopped playing on PC. It marked the transition from PC over to console gaming for me as the primary source of gaming. I needed to step away from the high commitment that was in PC gaming itself and went into something a little bit more casual, playing on a console where the players aren't as committed and there isn't as much of an emphasis on long-term hardcore play styles. So I kind of stepped away for a little bit and was playing on Xbox, and for a good while I was just bouncing around between different types of games, different RPGs, playing some older ones like Fable, Diablo 3, and transitioned over onto the Xbox One when that was released. Then Elder Scrolls Online was announced to be opening on consoles. I pre-ordered and was there on day one. I remember having to take a day off of work to be able to be there on launch day. but it would have been great if the servers weren't so bad and were struggling to keep up with the amount of players that had migrated over. I enjoyed the game and I played it for about a year. With the ongoing server issues that I personally was experiencing, I figured it was time for me to go and try something else out that was available. And I moved on to other games, such as Division, Destiny 2, tested out Anthem for a while, and played some of these other different type of, I'd call them MMO lights. First-person shooters, third-person shooters that felt more like an MMO than they did a shooter, just because of the play style of it. Run, gun, got skills. It's based more on the gear than it is on the actual shooting, because it's not a one-shot kill, it's a use your skills, set everything up, and go through it like that, which was a little bit different. And I was actually able to play with quite a few guys from work. They all played on those games as well. They weren't as dedicated gamers as I myself were, and it allowed me to once again bring my making builds for other people. I'd custom tailor builds to fit their play style and their level of ability to play, to where they would actually still be viable and useful in content in the game, and it would help them out a lot to where they had something they could use that would suit the way that they played and allow them to actually be useful in in-game content, which helped a lot. And it was fun for me getting back into that whole custom building a character for somebody else again, bouncing between all these games and having some fun playing Diablo, Destiny, Division 2 when that came out. You know, a constant influx of games, because I couldn't really get too hardcore into one because the community itself wasn't strong enough to keep me active and wanting to play, and there wasn't enough new content coming out. That casual aspect of gaming on console itself was what really drew me and kept me in a more casual gameplay style. And after a few years of doing this, I finally decided it was time to go back to PC and get into some real gaming. And now there's a lot of games that I'm looking forward to playing that are coming out, that I'm really hoping that when they do come out, they'll be a lot of fun and they'll be as good as they're being hyped up to be. Alrighty, well gamers, thank you for watching. That's the brief overview of my last 20 years in MMORPGs. Next time, I'll talk to you about the games that I'm currently playing and the games that I'm looking forward to coming out. Games such as Blue Protocol, which is looking like it's going to be a huge game done by a AAA company, Bandai Namco, and they seem to be doing a lot for it and putting a lot of effort into what they're doing, trying to get it good off launch rather than throwing out something and then fixing it as they go. So hopefully that'll be good and we can all enjoy something that comes out nice. Have a good day and talk to you next time.